the beauty of the last project that we heard about, the Orbis project. Oh, wait a second, please. Shh. So that everybody can hear. The beauty of that project for the foundation is that it's going to help us implement all of our projects. It's going to work across all of our projects because they'll be using the data from this project to train the algorithm. So that's will be something that will work very well to integrate into the DCF suite of projects and the Horizon grant. So on to teens. So all day you've been hearing us talk about let's get younger people involved. Let's give them a seat at the table. So with the Teens for Democracy program here at DCF, we're trying to do just that. So we have, we're pleased to have with us today, you'll meet in a moment, Ines and Alexia. They were the creators and founders of the Teens for Democracy program. And right now, Teens for Democracy is focusing on two key projects. One is the idea of replicating everything that you are going to see over the next few days, but doing it with teens. So we'd have a parallel conference with teens discussing all of these issues that you're hearing about. So we're doing a very small experiment this year, a pilot project, where we have a group of about 15, I think, teens from Greece, Sweden, and France who will take part in a discussion led by Mette Koban of My Life, My Say on the future of tech and the future of work. So they're taking the same brief that's used for that session that will be discussed in the plenary, and they will at the same time, or more or less, be discussing exactly the same issues. And it'll be fascinating to hear what they come up with. So that's one of our projects. The second one involves giving teens a seat at the table at the local level in municipal councils. And this is a project we're going to hear more about from Maria Xenou. She's the deputy mayor of Alimos here in Greece. I'll call her up in just a moment. But just to say that the core mission of both of these projects is to work towards bridging the gap that you've been hearing about, that intergenerational gap, to take teens' voices, so going from all the way down to 13-year-olds, to take those voices into account and make sure that they're heard. So now I'd like to welcome Maria Xenou, the Deputy Mayor of Alimos, who will tell us about the municipality project.
Thank you so much. The presenter of a TV game show asks the 5 young players to name 5 Greek prime ministers. With great difficulty, and despite the noble effort of the presenter, they manage to come up with the names of only 2, and they lose. On their couches at home, in front of the screen, the adults watching the program are extremely critical and pessimistic, making comments like, "They should be ashamed of themselves. Young people today are so ignorant and indifferent, and they expect to vote. Shame on them. What has today's youth come to?" But are things actually like this? Politics is one of the realities and harsh aspects of society that teenagers have to face as soon as they become adults, since they acquire specific rights and obligations. Why should a teenager become interested in an area of conflict and controversy, or have to consider complex issues that he can barely understand or influence, and which possibly do not affect his life directly, or even try to figure out who is right about matters and create contradiction even within his immediate family? The reality is that young people today have little knowledge and interest in politics. Some, even university students, cannot name correct order, identify the political parties, or refer to key events in the last 10 years. What prevails today in the indifference of young people towards the political process? Why is this happening when, in fact, today's generations, in relation to previous ones, has at their disposal guaranteed opportunities of freedom of expression, a higher educational level, as well as unlimited sources of information? So what's wrong and what's the problem? To answer this question, we need to look at politics itself. The word politics is derived from the noun polis, the Greek word for city. The polis, according to Aristoteles, was created with one purpose in mind: to make it easier for citizens to secure the daily necessities which would help them live better. The term society, or kinonia in Greek, comes from the verb kinono, which in ancient Greek means to share or do something together with others. Society, then, is a group of people who coexist and cooperate with others to achieve a common goal. I think that this review has already revealed the essence of politics and common goal. We are here today to support a program that seeks to engage young people in the community through local government. The municipality of Alimos has accepted its participation in the program because it deeply believes and supports that if we want a better tomorrow with fewer inequalities and more justice, we need to introduce tomorrow's citizens to the values of democracy and political freedom from an early age. Of course, the road to achieving this goal is long and difficult, but all attempts need to start somewhere. So let's begin our efforts through the municipalities, which are the closest authority to every citizen. The challenge is to succeed as a municipal authority in inspiring young people by showing them the value of sharing common problems as well as the value of participating in a common goal, while all the same time cultivating responsibility and the rules of decision-making in a democracy. All this can be accomplished through setting an example, our own example. In future, they are prepared with the necessary resources to shape a better, healthier, and fairer society. That's why we need to be careful. We need to treat them with kindness, compassion, understanding, to be tolerant, welcoming, and approachable. I personally believe that it's worth trying. We need young people for our common good. They are our future. Let's set aside for a minute the current condition, the internet, the absence of politically informed youth, and let's consider some ageless characteristics of young people as Aristoteles so wisely described them. Young people love honor, and even more than that, they love victory, because they want to excel, and victory is a kind of excellence. They love these two, honor and victory, more than money, or better, they don't care about money at all, because they haven't yet experienced poverty. Young people do not have an immoral or dishonest nature. They are in all probability extremely moral and virtuous because they haven't seen or experienced examples. They are full of hope, and this is because nature has endowed them with a kind of warmth like that felt by those who have drunk a little too much wine. But this individuality they possess is also due to the fact that they haven't yet experienced many failures. They live mainly in hope because hope is about the future and memory of failure is about the past. They prefer to do what seems good to them, rather what is good for them, because their actions are dictated more by the heart than by cold calculation. And while one considers interest, virtue considers beauty. The truth is, they exaggerate everything. They love too much, they hate too much, and the same goes for all the other actions. They believe that they know everything in everything. For this very reason, they exaggerate. If they happen to commit any kind of wrongdoing or offense, it is mainly due to insolence or audacity and to not malice. They easily feel pity because others they consider all people simple and virtuous. That's why they believe that if something bad happens to someone, they don't deserve it. This is what Aristotle says. And what do you say? In fact, we at the municipality of Alimos are excited about this prospect because this is exactly what we have decided to dare to do. To leave you with a quote from Aristotle: where there is hope in the future, there is power in the present. And since hope is the foundational quality of all chance, there is considerable reason to be excited. Thank you so much.
Well, Welcome everyone. I'm Ines Altiel, a 16-year-old student in Campaign School and the co-founder of Teens for Democracy.
I'm Alexia Review, and I'm the second co-founder of Teens for Democracy.
This panel is about bridging the intergenerational gap, and with us today we have Dr. Jim Clarke, a researcher in Sapienship, Mr. Avishai Ben Aharon, founder of HeChalutz, and Mrs. Olga Siokou-Siova, the head of communications in the UN Children's Fund in Greece. So, what we know is defined by our education and experience, and the social norms 30 years ago are not the same as they are today. And actually, in a course description in Cornell, it talked about the importance of understanding why differences exist between generations, rather than just focusing on what these differences are, which tear us apart. So, Alexia, would you like to proceed with your first question?
Of course. The start of Russia's military intervention in Ukraine generated the biggest brain drain in the history of the country. This phenomenon climaxed following Vladimir Putin's announcement of partial mobilization on September 21st, last Wednesday, when thousands of young men started fleeing the country to avoid conscription. Does this reaction show a lack of social responsibility or a growing political awareness on the part of the new generation? Regardless of the cause of this reaction, how can politicians bridge the gap that has led to the loss of trust in institutions on the part of Generation Z? So, Dr. Clarke, would you like to start?
Well, obviously, the situation in Ukraine is very difficult right now. There's a conflict on, and I think what we're seeing among the young Russian men is a reaction that they don't want to take part in it. They don't want to risk their life for this particular conflict. It's difficult to map this across to an issue of trust in the institutions. There are clearly flaws with the Russian democratic system. And nevertheless, though, it seems also clear that a clear majority of Russians support Vladimir Putin. Now, whether that's generational or not is not necessarily something we can test right now, but certainly I think the young people are voting with their feet, if you like, rather than at the ballot box, because they're literally leaving the country. And we see similar in many other locations as well, to expand the topic beyond Russia. We see a constant north-south or south-north migration from the global south towards the north. For many similar reasons, people suffering from inequality, conflict issues, lack of opportunity. It's sometimes described as economic migration, but it's much wider than economics that drives a young person to get up and leave their own country and everything they're familiar with and go somewhere else. So I think, and obviously it's the countries that can least afford to lose their bright, intelligent young people that are losing them, whether it's Filipino nurses moving to Britain, whether it's young African men moving to Germany, whether it's Syrians, leaving a conflict zone. These are countries that need those young people back to help rebuild their countries and rebuild their democracies. So it is a concerning issue.
If I may just add a 2 cents of this topic, I would take it a little bit back and say and look into how governments in general and UN member states, speaking on behalf of UNICEF, engage their citizens to be truly active in the decision-making processes. So if a young person or an adult eventually doesn't feel included early on, they end up not feeling relevant to what's going on within their country and eventually in global politics. So I think that also plays a very important role in what we're seeing today, what we're being watching around the world happening, including the recent examples, the example that you gave, Alexia. And I think that's what we're trying to do as an organization and as the UN, try to include more young voices truly and meaningfully without taking decisions for them, but with them throughout the way.
Thank you very much.
So I'm going to move on to the next question, which is again for Dr. Clarke, but if anybody wants to add anything, you're more than welcome to. So we're in an aging population. The number of 60-year-olds has tripled since 1950. And in 2050, it's estimated that it's going to be around 2.1 billion, while the fertility rate has decreased by 50%. And a lot of politicians say, yes, we want to give youth a seat at the table, we should include youth, but most of the time it's just youth-wash jargon, a tokenistic approach, with a generous bit of condescending. So, Dr. Clarke, Sapienship has talked about the importance of collaboration and how we humans are able to work flexibly and with a large amount of people. And one of the ways of communication is through mentoring systems. But social paradigms define mentoring systems today as the older people mentoring younger people. But what if we turned it around? What if instead of having, or also having, a mentoring system which makes youth mentor older politicians?
I think it's a great idea. I mean, to clarify, Sapienship is a social impact company that was founded by Professor Yuval Noah Harari. And one of our key kind of focuses is that we allow every voice to be heard, because we think we're one human species and we're all created equally and we all have a right to be heard. And that includes young people. That's irrespective of age, gender, race, whatever artificial distinction you want to create. So you're quite right. Traditionally, mentoring systems have been top-down. I'm guilty of it myself. When I was a university lecturer in England, we created a mentoring system for young black men that went all the way down. So we had members of faculty mentoring students, we had university students mentoring secondary school students, and even all the way down to secondary students mentoring primary school students, because there's huge kind of fallout from the educational system amongst that demographic. So to have a mentor, to have a role model, it is an important thing in many circumstances like that one, so they could see, okay, my future can be like this guy, not like those guys at the end of my street. But sometimes we need to be listening, as you say, in the other direction. We need to be listening to the young people who have a much greater stake in the future than somebody of my age, for example. I may not live to see, you know, the full effects of the climate crisis, but my 2-year-old son will. And therefore, my interest is as much proxy on his behalf as it is for myself in relation to wanting to see the climate crisis tackled. So I think we heard about it earlier today, deliberative democracy, having fora where young people can speak directly to politicians, advise them on these intergenerational gaps that have emerged in voting, things like the Brexit election in Britain, the referendum where older people supported it and younger people did not, issues like the climate crisis where there's a clear generational gap between young and old people in terms of how serious they think it is and how important and how critical the response needs to be. Yes, I think we do need to hear from them in many places, especially somewhere like the United States, where the politicians are becoming older and staying longer in power than ever before.
Does anybody else want to add?
Yes, I would like to give a different point of view from the panel speakers. I think I'm the youngest, even though I'm not a teen anymore. And the agenda that I hear in this conference from all kinds of points of views is that the teens want and deserve and need a seat around the table. I'm not sure that's good. I hope it doesn't find you too uncomfortable. Liberal democracy should not in any way be taken for granted. I meet several hundred, maybe more than 1,000 young adults and old teens in Israel every year. And Israel was founded and is still a liberal democracy, but the level of intellectual and educational understanding of liberal democracy in Israel's educational system is very low. I do not want to give teens more political power in these ages, because you are inherited with, especially in Europe, in the Western world, with the understanding that liberal democracy is here to stay and is strong. But in Israel, there are a lot of fundamental powers also, and religious powers, and the populistic right-wing wave all around the world is also affecting us. For me, giving 16-year-old more political power can be a very dangerous thing in this atmosphere, especially when the educational system doesn't do its mandatory job of educating for strong liberal democracy values. Because in Israel, we don't do that too much, and I'm not sure that it happens so much in Europe. And I want to give it another context. for many years, Europe didn't have an external enemy in the Western world since the Russian era ended, and now starting in a different way. And I think that the inner problems were handled, or you didn't look at them. We didn't look at them. But the combination of a communist depression and an external enemy and ongoing inner political problems is a very good ground for populistic right-wing forces. And bringing teams which are more vulnerable to outer interfering with their agendas, I'm not sure that's a good thing unless it's backed with a very strong state-backed educational system that supports liberal democracy.
Thank you. Thank you for your answer, both of you. Do you want to add anything?
Hearing you speak, and it's a very strong and valid point. I just want to take it maybe a step further, as you said, and see if it's a responsibility of states, member states, governments, local governance, schools, educators, but also each and every one of us. Because when you raise a child from very early on, respecting their opinion, treating them as equals, of course, guiding them as a mature adult, but treating them along the way and raising them to understand that their voice and their opinion matters, I think then they will have, very early on, in 12, 14, 16 years old, the maturity and the capacity to understand what it means to fight for your opinion and your rights. So yes, it is education, yes, it is the states, but I think it's also a social behavioral change issue, and it's something that we're focusing on with UNICEF for each and every one of us to understand the power of young people as they're taking over, obviously, across the globe, and educate them very, very early on, and raise them in such ways that they also value that power.
I don't think too much of young people as much as I think of old people. I love humans, and I respect humans. And in that point of view, how you educate your kids at home is a private solution. I'm looking about nationwide or worldwide solutions, which must be backed by states. You can be a good parent and you can make them freedom of choice and moral human beings and raise them as moral human beings, but that's your private responsibility. That's not an all-purpose, a very wide effect. And also, like making democracy conferences for young adults or for teens, that's nice. 200 or 3,000 people will go to a conference, but I want 300 million to take those values strongly in order to withstand the right-wing populistic wave of propaganda. You need a very strong stamina, an immune system that can withhold all those forces upon you.
But that won't come from the state. What we're talking about, and you mentioned it, is social media. The echo chambers that people exist in social media that has taken the place of what used to be a public sphere where everybody's voices was heard. Now people are only listening to the voices that reinstate their own opinions and reinforce their own opinions online.
I saw that Meta is supporting this conference as a part of the problem. That's kind of interesting, for me at least. Of course, social media is a part of the problem, and it should be regulated, and that's also something that should be taken care of. But the educational, as an educational director, I think that's the basic level, and I think that, I grew up in a kibbutz. You know what a kibbutz is? It's a socialist democratic community in Israel that's like a complete other side of a market society and capitalistic way of living. And my forefathers, they made a crucial mistake. They thought that the kibbutz will forever stand. It was so strong, it was so dramatic, it was so historically important in Israel. But they forgot to do something very, very important. They thought that if you will live the kibbutz life, you will become a socialist democrat. Apparently, that doesn't how it works. My nation, the Jewish people, we believe in stories and the forces of stories. Once you don't tell the generations, where you came from, what the moral lesson is, and how you should educate the society for a better future, even the strongest fundamentals of society, they can crumble.
So based on your answer, there's a question about how politicians and political institutions actually deal with this entire situation. Young people across Europe are not politically disengaged, as is commonly assumed. A recent European Commission study has found. In fact, most of them vote and fully support democracy, even if they think that politics have become a more distorted view of what they want and should become more about the common good and less about corporate and elite interests. Evidently, there's a huge gap between the perception of the term greater good for each generation, with youth demanding a shift to a more direct democracy and a stronger economy. So do you believe that it is realistic for these two views to ever align, or is this just a perpetual phenomenon of intergenerational conflict? How do you envision, in other words, a new leadership model that can inspire, guide, and appeal to youth while also satisfying their needs? Mrs. Siokou-Siova, would you like?
With this mic now? Oh, okay, great, thank you. So a very interesting question, and thank you for asking this, Alexia. And I think that this is one of the priorities that we're trying to tackle across the globe, but also within countries, high-income countries that already have established mechanisms for decision-making and agendas that need to be met. How do we bring the priorities, the themes that young people believe and strongly support that they are important into the already set agendas. I think we can only do it by being open, by being realistic, us adults and politicians and governments bringing their expertise, but also listening to young citizens, active citizens, or about to become citizens that will eventually take the baton and take the lead in implementing the policies that today's politicians establish and set. So I think that it is realistic, it can be done, as long as we work collectively across all sections with institutions such as the EU, as you mentioned, but also at government level, member state government level, and local governance, because a lot of decisions that evolve and are about children and youth take place at local governance.
Would anyone else like to add something on this question?
Well, I mean, just to respond again to that issue of the intergenerational gap, and I'm reiterating what you've been kind of saying as well, things are much, much more fragile than we necessarily are aware of if we don't listen to young people. When you look at the youth of France, 58% of them no longer think that democracy is the best mode of government. 55% of young people in Italy, and that's led to recent votes in both of those countries that have shocked the older population. Which is not to say that young people in Europe are rapidly becoming right-wing, but what they are becoming is desperate. They're becoming desperate for more radical responses to the issues that concern them, which are primarily economic. It's things like youth unemployment. We're here in Greece, 3 times the number of young people in Greece are unemployed as older Greeks. Same in Spain, same in Italy, same in many countries. And they want more radical answers, and they're looking to the far left and to the far right for those answers because they're not finding it in mainstream politics, and that's very, very concerning. And that's why we're seeing these intergenerational gaps opening up, because we're not getting everybody in the room, including the young people, and all talking together and hearing all the voices.
I can identify with some of these things. I think that inside the liberal atmosphere we are all a part of, it's really easy or sometimes misleading to think that it's about only education or meeting between the generations. Basically, it's the economic. We are, mainly you, I'm on the edge of it. You are the first generation in modern age that will have less than his parents. Will have less pension, less welfare country, less nature, less oxygen, less oceans, less security. That's something you should be furious for. That's the goal, but that's a thing that the political and economical elite that support the political institution doesn't really want to change, because that's taken from boomers and that age area and giving you, and giving those that will have less, that won't be able to afford a house, that won't have a good retirement, and I think that's what should be talked about. You deserve not only symbolic or even true power, you deserve resources, you deserve welfare, you deserve better life than your parents has. That's a good agreement to make in society, and you deserve that.
I completely agree. So I believe since we ran a bit early, we have one more time for a short question, and then any questions from the audience. So since we don't have a lot of time, Ms. Siokou-Siova, this question is directed at you. So one of the most important differences, and as you said, this cohort, our generation will probably live worse lives than our parents, but there's some aspects which we have which older generations didn't. So one of the most important differences between this cohort and older cohorts is that this cohort is fighting for acceptance over gender and sexuality and actually getting acceptance. So in what ways do you think the younger generation's fight over inclusion and acceptance has empowered and inspired older generations who were forced to be silenced to accept themselves for who they are?
Thank you for the question, Ines. And the short answer is certainly. We see it across the globe every day. The longer answer has to do with the tools that are existing now and the access to these platforms that people have and young people have, allowing them and empowering them to voice their opinions. However, these platforms might not be inclusive across the different age groups, right? So we do see a movement. We see young children and young people leading that movement on gender issues, on religious issues, on inclusion and acceptance and so on and so forth. However, yes, certain groups are empowered, but other groups still are left behind. And we need to move forward with all these ever-evolving platforms, having also in mind that there are still social groups that are excluded from this openness and this innovative way of dealing with social issues and rights-based issues. Again, try and find ways that also include these age groups. I don't know if any of the panelists would like to pitch in. Thank you.
I'm a progressive, and so gender equality and sexual equality, of course, is very important subjects, and teens and younger generations are really making a progress and also helping adults adapt to those agendas. That's great, but I would say that in most cases, not a structural difference. That's more of a political, soft politics. That doesn't support what I just said before. You will have gender equality, but we will all be poor, okay? So that's inequality in the end. I think that's something that inside the liberal consensus is not well dealt. We don't have good enough answers to that. We go from around, but we don't reach to the bottom of it, or the heart of it.
Thank you very much. And on that note, is there anybody who wants to ask a question to one of the panelists?
We will take that.
Thank you very much for this opportunity to speak. My question is specifically for you, Mr. Ben Aharon. You said Israel is a liberal democracy, but a report from Amnesty International just this year said it was an apartheid state. So how can we reconcile notions of liberal democracy with de jure racial discrimination?
I said Israel was established as a liberal democracy, and it still is. It is a struggling democracy. I don't understand Israel as an apartheid state, even though I am completely against the control of the West Bank. I think Israel, as a Jewish and democratic state, has its right to exist peacefully with its neighbors, and it's our responsibility as the stronger part of the conflict to advance towards peace.
Ms. Siokou-Siova, Dr. Clarke, Mr. Aharon, thank you very much for your input. From this fruitful discussion, it became evident that the true beacon of light that exists through Gen Z is its engagement and innovation, despite living in a world of constant crisis. Thank you very much to all of you, and
Thank you.
A wonderful crowd.
Thank you very much to our teen moderators and our esteemed panelists. And that concludes our program for today, the daytime program. Thank you. And we look forward to seeing all of you in just a few short hours right here in the atrium at the Zapion with an address by the President of the Hellenic Republic, followed by Ban Ki-moon, Jeffrey Sachs, and a whole suite of other speakers for a rich program to kick off the plenary of the Athens Democracy Forum. Thanks, everybody.